Welcome to another Wisdom Pod with Jonathan Schwartz with us today. John is a medical director in interventional cardiology at Atrium Health. He's a clinical assistant professor of medicine, and that is at Wake Forest University School of Medicine. He's in Charlotte metro area. We're going to talk about innovation in medicine today, which is one of my favorite topics on earth. This podcast is brought to you by podpire.com. That's my podcasting agency. If you want to start, scale, or be invited to podcasts like this one and just benefit from the greatest flywheel known to man in the business realm, that is podcasting, podpire.com for that. John, welcome to the pod. Tell us a bit more about yourself and what you up to nowadays.
Thank you. Yes. So I'm a very busy clinician in practice, but I mostly in my free time, I have a little bit of time as part of my practice to spend working on innovation, mostly in cardiology devices, but that varies from things all the way to just getting started and helping engineers get ideas off the ground to implanting devices that aren't approved yet in patients. Then I also have a few of my own companies. So it keeps me busy, but it's fun.
So how do you balance all of that, quote unquote? You must be crunching at least 12 hours in your daily practice. How do you make time for your startups?
Yeah, it's difficult. With practice, sometimes it's even more than that. I'm on call about once a week and on the weekends, and that'll go all through the night. So, but the things that are important, you make time for. And some of it overlaps a little bit, so I can use some time during work to work on things, but it's usually nights and weekends.
Nights and weekends. All right. Okay. So why the need to start these startups when you're doing something quite gratifying, which is saving people's lives almost on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think medicine is very rewarding in and of itself, but as part of the process, you'll encounter patients in clinical scenarios where you don't have options. There's not treatments for patients. And so that is sort of a driver for my interest in both helping other companies sort of get their products and their solutions to these problems off the ground, but then I'll have some of my own ideas during the process. And if it's something that I feel has potential and I have time for, then we go for it. So it keeps it interesting. It's very busy, but I'd rather be busy than bored.
So your practice, your startups, the professorship, and you accept these podcast interviews. But I relate to you, I'm not like, how do you do that? Because I myself get like around 15, 20 meetings a day, and yeah, I'm hardcore and love it that way. Like a bunch of people are like, don't you feel scattered in all directions? But no, I like it that way. It's like stimulation for an ADHD brain, quote unquote. Is your brain like that too?
Yeah, a little bit. I think I keep my mind busy, but there's times when you have to focus. I'm sure you understand that as well. But like in the middle of procedures, you can't be, daydreaming. So I don't have ADHD, but I do have a lot of thoughts, and inside my head's pretty busy all the time. I'm sure yours is similar.
Yeah, me, I have ADHA, so it's not a disorder, it's an advantage because you can take all that energy and focus it into one point with tools like meditations and so forth. What do you use or techniques that you have to get yourself into a focused and sort of flow state?
Yeah, exercise for sure. Every day, make sure I get some kind of exercise and get a good sweat going. That really helps. It also sort of things that I've been sort of mentally chewing on. I find at the end of it, you can sort of get a little clarity often. So that helps a lot. But I haven't tried meditation. I don't know if you do that. I'd love to hear more about that.
On and off, I've done extreme stuff like Vipassana retreat, which is 10 days of silent meditation, which is a lot. You meditate 10 hours a day. Didn't find my path into that, but the meditation habit, it's on and off. And also there's different forms of meditation in between work and meetings, I just get out with the dogs here and sit on my patio and get some sun exposure and, close my eyes and chill for 5 minutes, if that counts as meditation. But yeah, no, my meditation practice is not the best today. There's also other forms, you can find flow and meditation and during sports and physical activity. What kind of physical activity do you do? Is just hitting the gym, going for a run?
Running, yeah, for sure. So back when I started my training as a fellow, I knew the training is pretty vigorous, and most of the time you're either sort of standing in like a procedure room doing a long procedure, or sitting at a computer, which is not obviously good for your health. So I was never like a big runner, but I got into it, and I do half marathons now. I usually do 6 to 10 or 12 a year. So I know you're an Ironman, right?
Ironman, and last weekend I did a Spartan Ultra, which is really fun. So I'd recommend that to you and the whole audience. You really get down and dirty, but the Ultra is 50 kilometers and 60 obstacle in the mountain. But I mean, it's not for everyone. It's quite hard. But yeah, to me, certainly felt good. And what's cool and different from the marathons, for example, is that you jump in a cold river at many points, so it's like a deflammation of the muscles, which is strongly needed. At another point, you run in mud, so it's good for the articulations, like massage. So I really like these races. I think they're more sustainable, but the other side, you can get injured right in those obstacles. They're quite dangerous. The obstacles, like pretty sure a bunch of people fucked themselves up. They had the emergency, and I saw a bunch of people hurt in these events. But no, they're pretty fun. I want to ask you though, like talking about injuries or inefficiencies or how technology could help you in your daily practice. What are the cases where you've been like, oh, a bot could actually help me get that operation get done more efficiently, or if I would be better organized or have better data, I could actually have better outcomes? What have been the use case, the technology use case, medtech or whatever you feel it is, in terms of startups, of problems you've seen, and case in which you've seen like, oh, this can be potentially solved by this startup idea?
Yeah, so starting with sort of the less interesting ones, but are very important, I think, are some startups that are working on access to care. There's a lot of patients that would benefit from things that are approved already that we just have difficulty getting to, either for travel reasons or socioeconomic problems or awareness. Sometimes like local physicians just don't know that there's ways to treat these things, and so there's a couple of programs and things that we work with where it'll scan through charts and sort of flag patients that would potentially be benefiting from this, and that we can then reach out to them. Interestingly, the social aspect of that is it's a little bit of a dance to try to reach out to the physician that is caring for them to get them to refer to get therapies, just because it's kind of like, oof, you might have been missing us for a while. And, we're not trying to tell you you're a bad doctor. We're just trying to get help for your patients. And so it was sort of an unintended consequence, I think, of some of the technologies that they've designed for this. But those, that's not that complex or super interesting. It's great for patients, but sort of the more interesting ones are the modeling software programs where, like, say a patient has some really difficult anatomy that we're not sure how to do it. There's now ways to sort of implant virtual devices, and then not only look at, is this going to work in the short term, but what's the long term viability of these things. So those are still pretty early in development, but there's a huge potential there.
Leading causes of death, I do believe that, yeah, cardiac arrest are top 5. Yeah, stroke, accidents. Yeah, I think it's number 5, right? 162K deaths on a yearly basis. So still a big problem for humanity. You attribute that to what exactly, and how could we change your lifestyle to improve this cause of death?
Yeah, so it's a little like when you look at the tables like that where they say causes of death, the cardiac ones are always a little tricky to read, because if it says like cardiac arrest, there's so many reasons that could happen. Is it a heart attack versus is it an electrical problem in the heart? Is it heart failure? Those are all very different, and so you sort of need to approach them each differently. With the most common one probably being coronary artery disease causing heart attacks and heart failure. The easiest way to prevent that, is, again, it's nothing too sexy, but diet, exercise, avoiding things like smoking, stuff like that. More interesting, I think, would be sort of like gene therapy type things. There's some interest in trying to identify populations that have early progression of this, and then maybe finding ways to modify it earlier in their life. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, and I was wrong in reading these stats with 700K deaths a year. I'm not sure if it was for US or Ireland. It was number one. So I read the stroke one. I mean, yeah, the heart is quite obviously important. It seems to me that people just wake up too late in their lives. They're oblivious of their internal organs. They just go with their lives. They have the standard American diet, and then they wake up and then they outsource everything in your hands, and they're like, "Hey, save me, Dr. Schwartz." I think that's fundamentally wrong. I think humans should fix themselves. They should prevent also. They should get these scans, I guess, get themselves checked and have that bodily consciousness as well. Why is society like always outsourcing health, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'm not sure. And sort of related is some of it's maturity and sort of understanding. I think a lot of people live in the moment. We sort of have a society now where, Instagram, it's like, oh, here's a picture, here's the next picture, move on, the next thing, the news cycle, things last a day. So people don't really like to think too far ahead. But I can't tell you how many times patients will come in and they'll be like, I lived a pretty hard life when I was younger, and I really wish I would have put more thought into what this is going to look like later in life. And so I don't know how we change that mindset, but that would help a lot.
So we talk about the social aspect, right? Like humans need to be understood, heard, and felt. I think a leading cause of that is also stress, right? Like a lot of people stress themselves to death. People don't realize that as well. A lot of people think this is woo-woo, but I mean, cortisol, it's quite easy to observe its effects on the body. The immune reactions, autoimmune reactions, and yeah, it just wreaks havoc on the body. That is if you're chronically stressed. So humans can stay in the picture, right? To understand humans and feel them and talk with them. What do you see the role of AI in robotics? Do you sometimes feel while operating someone on the table that a bot could do a better job than you and your team?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. It's a bit of a hot topic in cardiology right now. So the procedures I do are pretty varied, so it's hard to lump them all into one. But one of them in particular, putting stents in and taking pictures of the arteries in the heart and angiography. There is actually a robot that was designed about 15, maybe 18 years ago, and it sort of had a big splash when it came out. There was some interest in it. A couple small studies were done. Things were pretty positive, but it just never really got any effort behind it. People didn't love it. Actually, one of my partners was one of the highest users in the world, and he likes it, but just the rest of us didn't really catch on. And that was the same for most places. And now the company that made it was a startup. They did get purchased for a very large sum of money a few years ago, but now they've decided they're not going to make it anymore just because it's not being used. So I don't know where that's going to go. I think there's a lot of potential there, particularly in like rural areas where it's just there's not a lot of physicians like me that work in small hospitals, and maybe you could offer this to patients by doing it remotely. There's a lot of concerns there, like if something goes wrong, who's there to help take care of them? But we sort of have to balance access to care versus risk, and I'm not sure where that's going to head. But I don't see robots taking over my job, at least for quite some time.
I see also in that case usability and UX. It's like pieces of the puzzle that are not often mastered by medtech founders. You know, most medtech founders, they're like, oh, I have an idea and can save lives, but that Silicon Valley aspect of the equation is not often put up front. And it's very important that your end users, aka doctors, have fun using your solution. And most importantly, that it's so easy and so effective and so obvious that it works, that they actually stick around, you know? So when I was hearing you say this, I was like, I would just acquire this startup. I would add a UX engineer to the team and even someone to accompany them, or just have an unboxing experience a la iPhone. You know, it's so easy to use and it's almost instant, and there's a training and everything is super easy and step by step. But yeah, that is often complicated to implement. What other problems such as this one do you often see in the medtech and medical innovation startup world?
Yeah, the other one, it's a common problem. I think you could expand to everything is the user testing is somewhat lacking sometimes. And so we'll get these devices where startups will approach us and say, hey, we'd love to have you try this out. Let us know what you think. And it's clear that like a physician has never tried it before. It's just not practical the way that it's been designed to implant it, or it takes too long. It's hard to visualize while you're doing it. The way that you get to the part in the body that you need to get to, they didn't really think about that aspect of it. And so skipping over sort of the really important parts of designing these things happens so frequently. And it's unfortunate because sometimes they get so far down the road with funding and promise and all that, that it's almost too far for them to go to start over again. And, you know, that's a huge waste of money and time and everything.
Seems to get accepted in the market, most of them have to go through a lot of governance and regulations, FDA approval and so forth. That seems to be pretty costly and a long process, right? So what are the options in that case? Get big funding, or sometimes, yeah, like partnerships that could lead to acquisitions with health giants. I don't know, like Siemens, for example, comes to mind, or Samsung even is big into health tech, I believe. So what are the paths if I want to start a medical device that makes it to market in, let's say, less than 3 years? What can be the potential paths for me to have a billion-dollar exit in 10 years from now?
Well, yeah, that's almost like winning the lottery, but it does happen. It's tricky, especially money is tight right now, and so trying to raise it is difficult. Really, the best way to sort of, you know, keep as much of your own invention is to try to self-fund, or, you know, get angel investors and try to leave VCs out as far as you can. Strategic investments from the big companies do happen, like you mentioned, Siemens, like Medtronic, Abbott, all the big companies like that. They're very in touch with the devices that are sort of in their interests, and they're maybe similar or adjacent to their portfolios. But they often won't really get to the point of investing until you're at least at the point of animal studies and potentially even like small in human studies. And that's very expensive just to get to that point. Another sort of somewhat new, but maybe not totally new way to get there are incubators. They're a little less popular in medicine than you see in sort of like information technology or financial tech, all that stuff. But I think we've shown that it can work. We're actually building a facility here on our campus that is going to have not only like an innovation district, but also a big facility for animal testing and for education for users. And so that's a little bit of a step in a new direction that I'll be curious to see if we're able to sort of help these companies get off the ground. A couple other final options are sometimes some foreign countries are very interested in getting new devices and technologies to come from their countries. And so if you agree to do the clinical testing utilizing their universities, sometimes they'll give you free money, or even just a place to house your company. And then the last one would be grants from the military. Sometimes if there's some kind of military application, they'll often give you money that way.
Wouldn't it be better to also start the software route, since the hardware route is, in my opinion, 2 to 10x harder?
Well, it depends. I mean, if you're building something where there's not a huge like IT component to it, then it may not be that useful. But more and more, as you were saying, almost everything like has an app now or some kind of IT related part of it, and that is a very good way to start and make sure that you're getting off on the right foot.
What about consumer med tech? Because selling to doctors and hospitals and public organisms is often hard. What about shortcutting that and selling directly to the consumers? And it feels that there's a need. For example, as a biohacker, I'm buying an oxygen machine, for example. I think that costs like 5 to 10K. In my opinion, there should be like a consumer product that would be sold at, I don't know, 1K, and would be like a super sexy startup, B2C startup a la Casper, the mattresses. What do you think about that part of the market?
Yeah, that's a very appropriate question, because one of the startups I'm involved with is sort of trying to balance that right now. It's appropriate for some technologies, I think, but the biohacking component of things, where these are relatively safe devices that are non-invasive, they're not going to be hurting people, they're hopefully accurate, they're not going to give people information that's going to make them make decisions that are have negative consequences on their health. Those are the things that definitely could. Something like a heart valve that I put in, like there's really no commercial pathway for something like that. So it really is just dependent on the technology. But I think you do have to be a little bit careful about going the commercial route. You want to make sure that you don't get too big too fast. As we get bigger and into the era of AI and big data, the data is key. If you go too fast and have sort of poor quality information, that doesn't really help anybody.
Because to me, it seems that doctors are a filter to the consumer. They're like a precaution. They're like supervision, because if we would have that good of a product with almost no adverse effect, you could picture sort of a pacemaker that would be external, and with magnetism could, or like external forces could open up your valve, and it would be plug and play, super easy and very low risk. With these types of inventions, there could be direct to consumer, but that's not about to happen because there's a lot of risk involved and the technology is still not there.
Yeah, but sort of along the same lines, you could argue maybe like a detection device, like you put some listening device on your chest, and that could tell you, oh, something suspicious here for a valve problem. That'd be a way to get patients access to care that you're missing, and that would be safe and potentially something commercializable.
Yeah, it's like these heart rhythm HRV measures for triathletes that we see it, and the Apple Watch, the Aura Ring could be that also. I mean, yeah, they have very smart algorithms, but yeah, that's also hard. Yeah, there's a lot of place for innovation. That's why I'm so passionate about medtech, and you can save lives at scales or improve lives at scale. I want to ask you, because your profile is quite atypical. We don't often see, doctors that have time to take the interviews or that are passionate by tech. Do you feel that you're sort of alone in that little bucket of like, I don't know, being tech savvy, being passionate by startups? Do you feel that this is not really like a community that is building, or are you just like an oddball?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I don't want to speak for all my colleagues, but it is a small community. I think the way that I sort of am unique is I have an engineering degree, and then also did the formal biomedical engineering biodesign program at Stanford before I became a physician, all sort of towards the goal of becoming a medical innovator. And that pathway is not typical. I think most physicians they're interested in innovation, but they don't have time to do it. And then even if the ones that do, they don't know how to do it. And so that's sort of one of my goals is with this new center that we have here, is sort of to make a training program similar to the biodesign program, but make it a little more accessible for physicians, to sort of expand that population, because the need is there. the interest is there. It's just sometimes knowing how is the problem.
Do you feel it would be older colleagues? Because it seems to me that younger folks, they're so overwhelmed by everything that's new and learning the ropes. So do you feel it would be more veterans?
Oh, it really varies. I think probably the strongest interest is from the newer grads and the tech savvy physicians that are coming out. But there's a lot of like executive education type innovation programs, and those are always completely full of some older individuals. So I don't think you would have to limit it. I think everyone's got some kind of interest.
It's also my feeling, and I mean, you have your foot on the ground for that, but it's also my feeling that a lot of physicians are just overwhelmed, and depression is probably in highest when it comes to physicians and doctors. So how do well, is that true? You know, you're like right there on the ground. How do you feel that your colleagues are doing from a mental standpoint, and how can we potentially improve that?
Oh yeah, burnout is huge in my field, and particularly in interventional cardiology in particular, just because we have to take calls so often. And so it's still, I think it's better than it used to be. There's a lot more attention to making sure that you have time to recover after like you've been up all night. But there's still room for improvement. It's always a balancing act of, you don't want to spread the doctors so thin that they're not doing enough procedures, but, at least enough coverage to sort of keep the hospital running, treating patients, but also keeping a good mental state. So I think going forward, a little more focus would be helpful, and allowing physicians time to get away and do the things that sort of allow them to recharge.
Well, John, thank you so much for the time today. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, just I had probably Twitter's the easiest way to find me. I guess X now. It's just JG Schwartz MD, or simple Google search. I have like my practice has my own page there too.
It's Charles Cormier and John Schwartz for another Founder Wisdom podcast.